I got 5 different manuscripts tonight that I'm going to be comparing. The oldest Samaritan text, the Septuagint, I'm going to list them in the order of a chronological order. The oldest would be the Samaritan, after that the Septuagint, and then the Syriac, the Vulgate, and finally the Masoretic Text. So we're going to be comparing these texts tonight in regards to the genealogies that we read of in Genesis chapter 5. You know, a lot of Christians today believe that their Bible is 100% perfect in everything that it says, like everything is perfect and accurate. But a lot of Christians don't know about all these different manuscripts. They think that there's only one, basically. There's only one Hebrew text or Greek text that it is translated from, which is simply not true. So we have several different texts. Max says, how would you respond to Jews saying that the Masoretic text isn't new at all, but that it only seems to be quote-unquote new because short vowels were added in 11th century AD? Thank you for the question, Max. Very good question. My answer to that would be the oldest text that we have. It's the hard evidence that we have. The oldest text do not line up with the Masoretic text. And it sounds to me like the person that would make this argument saying that it was only just the vowels that were added, I think that they don't have a full understanding of what the Masoretic text really is. See, I think what they did is they confused the Masoretes, because the Masoretes are the ones who were responsible for the Masoretic text, but they were also responsible for the vowels as well, the additions of the vowels in the text. So now it wasn't just the addition of the vowels; it is another whole family of manuscripts. It's the oldest text that we have, like the Samaritan, does not line up with the Masoretic, as well as the Septuagint and the Syriac, even the Vulgate as well. To anybody that would say that, I would say, what evidence do you really have? Like, what clear evidence that you really have? I mean, the Dead Sea Scrolls don't even match with the Masoretic, perfectly either. So I think all the evidence that we have shows that the Masoretic is one of the latest of the manuscripts compared to all the other ones, compared to the Samaritan, the Septuagint, and the Syriac, and things like that. Thank you very much, Max. That's how I would respond to someone like that. Thank you for your question. This is true. Ask the question: Is the Masoretic the worst? If not, which one is, and how much? This is a great question as well. Thank you very much for the question. I wouldn't say it's the worst. I do believe that we have evidence that it has been changed. Actually, it's pretty obvious that it has been changed. And I think we have some evidence that of the reason why some of these verses and passages have been changed as well. But then again, the same with the Samaritan, in my opinion. Some would argue that the Septuagint was also changed to match a certain doctrines or certain communities here and there. Every single family of manuscripts, be it the Samaritan, the Septuagint, the Masoretic, they each have their pros and cons. I don't believe that any of them are perfect, and I believe the reason why is because human beings are not perfect, and even if the original was perfect, which we could argue about whether the original was perfect or not, I think that it's possible that even the original itself was not necessarily perfect, because again, scribes and prophets are human beings, and so they can make mistakes and such when they are translating, if you will, the heavenly word of God and putting it on something that's corruptible and putting it on paper. But it's not just the original that we're talking about, because nobody has the originals of any of these. It's the transmission of these texts. This is where the problem crept in. I think that a lot of the variations that we have were mistakes. I think that some of them, at least a few, were deliberately changed. And I think this is the case with, the Samaritan and the Masoretic. I believe the Septuagint, probably. And I don't suspect the Septuagint to be a product of so much of the malicious behaviors of human beings as much as some of the other ones. But the Septuagint is certainly not perfect either. This is true. Says, were the Masoretes deliberate? I don't think that I think that your question here is that you're asking, did the Masoretes, did they deliberately change the text? I don't know of any evidence that they specifically them did it, but somebody did. Whether it was the Masoretes themselves or the Pharisees, because the Masoretic text is the Pharisaical text. It actually is. So it was either one of the, or I can't say one. I think there was probably many of them throughout the centuries, Pharisees that built up to the Masoretic text that gradually changed the text all along, and the Masoretes just basically are the ones that kind of concretized it and solidified it into their canon. Tonight we are dealing with Genesis chapter 5, and we're going to be comparing these 5 manuscripts. There is a chart here I'm going to show you guys. This is a chart that is from a website by the name of Douglas Douma. It's Douglas DOUMA.com. I assume that it would be this gentleman that actually produced this chart. This chart shows us 3 out of the 5 manuscripts that we're going to be comparing tonight. You see over here on the left-hand side, we have the names of some of these patriarchs: Adam, Seth, Enos, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, and Shem. We're gonna stop at Shem tonight because we're not going to go any further than Genesis chapter 5. You see that this particular gentleman has everything all color-coded here. The green signifies the manuscripts, these 3 manuscripts that are in agreement. Okay, so wherever you see the green, that means all 3 manuscripts agree. So it's more likely that the green ones are accurate to the original. I say more likely because we have the Samaritan here, the middle column, the center column here. The Samaritan would be the oldest, the Septuagint the second oldest, and the Masoretic would be the newest in all of these. But in let's say the Adam's death, how old he was when he died, in these 3 manuscripts, it all agrees. They all agree. Okay, so that would signify that it's likely that this is the actual number according to the original. Same with all the green. But notice we don't have all that much green here, do we? We don't have all that much green. And this is a big problem for those people, someone like how I used to be, where I used to be just like how a lot of other evangelical Christians are today, where they're like, well, everything in the Bible is absolutely perfect, and there are no contradictions, there are no discrepancies, and everything is perfect, right to the letter. This kind of chart produces a huge problem because we don't have a lot that agree. Okay, so the green are the ones that all are in agreement. The sky blue signifies where the Masoretic and the Samaritan agree. Okay, so the Samaritan and the Masoretic agree quite a bit in the first few generations. The orange is where the Samaritan and the Septuagint agree. So you have the orange here in the bottom part of the second column. This would be the Samaritan, orange, and the Septuagint. Okay, and the Masoretic is the yellow is where the Masoretic and the Septuagint agree. Was hardly anything here apart from the green. So the Masoretic and the Septuagint agree on much of what it says about Jared and Methuselah and the death of Noah, and that's it for Genesis chapter 5 anyway. But you see, the ones that are labeled or colored in red are the ones that they don't agree at all. Like for example, Abram down here, I know we're not in Genesis chapter 11, but this is kind of shown in Genesis chapter 11, verse 26. The Masoretic shows Abram born in 1946, whereas the Samaritan shows he was born in 2377, and the Septuagint 3412. Some of these numbers are vastly different. The birth of Methuselah, for example, 687 in the Masoretic, 587 in the Septuagint, and 587 was the Samaritan, and 1,287 287, the Septuagint. But if you notice, some of these ones between the Masoretic and the Samaritan are like 100 difference, like Enoch, born 622, whereas the Samaritan is 522. Masoretic, Methuselah, born 687, Samaritan 587, So some of these ones that have like 100 years difference. And these ones I would suspect are scribal errors. Like today in the world, you might accidentally put an extra zero on something or put a one in front of something, or perhaps it's the handwriting, because remember back in those days they didn't have photocopier machines or cameras or computers or anything like that, of course, so they had to do everything by hand. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, or how many of you are familiar with like viewing ancient documents and numbers. Like several years ago, I looked into my own genealogy, and I was looking into some of the old census that that was taken from years and years ago, and the numbers that they wrote in there, it's very hard to read. Is that 50? Is that 37 or is that 57? Is that 17 or is that 37? It's very hard to read. A lot of these numbers are hard to read. In fact, even one of my progenitors, if you will, some of the ages were mixed up even then. And that wasn't that long ago, like maybe 150 years ago. Some of the ages were mixed up because of the handwriting. So I think this is what happened here, at least with some of these. Like look at Masoretic, Samaritan. We have Adam had a son when he was 130 years old. Samaritan 130, Septuagint 230. See, there's this extra 100. Now Adam remained alive for another 800 years in the Masoretic, another 800 years in the Samaritan, but only 700 in the Septuagint. So this particular gentleman that made a mistake here. He put this green when it actually shouldn't be green. It should have been blue, okay, and that should be red. Yeah. So you see, some of these ones are off by 100 years. Masoretic, Seth born at 130. Samaritan, Seth born at 130. Septuagint 230. Seth had a son according to the Masoretic at 105. Samaritan agrees 105, but Septuagint 205. Seth remained another 807 years according to the Masoretic. Samaritan agrees, but the Septuagint 707 years. So yeah, we have, I think, these kind of errors. Now I'm not going to say I know 100% for sure, but I would suspect that these kind of errors, when you got 100 off here, 100 off there, I would suspect them to be more like scribal errors as opposed to deliberate changes or something to that effect. Yes. How many people, I'm guilty of it. I'm sure everyone is guilty of it just to a certain degree, but we get so, picky about the details, right? And that's okay in certain circumstances, as long as we are fairly confident that it's accurate. But here you see how bad it really is when you compare with the other manuscripts. So I think that this is a testament, a witness to the fact that all of these have their problems. The Masoretic, the Samaritan, the Septuagint. Now I'm going to pull out the Vulgate here a little bit as well, and the Syriac as well. So the Syriac is very interesting as well, because the Syriac was translated early on as well, before the Masoretic was finished. So yeah, the Syriac. Let's see what we have in the Syriac. Speaking of the Syriac, let me see if I can pull this up. Yeah, This Is True says the Masoretic is always 100 years off. Well, yeah, like the first, how many? A lot. It seems like the Masoretic and many times the Septuagint or the Samaritan as well is 100 years off on many of these numbers. True. Yes, this is true. This Is True says, I came to understand that the Masoretes were trying to show that Shem was really Melchizedek. How do you think that they did that? You think they did that through the genealogies? This is true? Interesting. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so you know what? Let's take a look at the Vulgate, because this particular chart does not include the Vulgate. So the Vulgate, for those of you who don't know, the Vulgate was translated by Jerome, and it was translated was it like the 3rd century, something like that, 4th century, late 4th century is what it was. So it is not a super early text, but one could argue that it was earlier than the Masoretic text, like somewhere around the same time as the what do you call it now? The Codex Sinaiticus, the oldest Bible in the world. So the Masoretic, or the Vulgate here. So let's take a look at, we'll compare the Vulgate. So the Vulgate was translated in the 4th century. The Syriac, or the Peshitta, was translated in the 2nd century. So roughly speaking, the Samaritan is the oldest, the Septuagint after that, the Syriac after that, the Vulgate after that, and then the Masoretic text last. Okay, so let's have a peek here. So Genesis chapter 5, verse 3, we have the Masoretic and the Samaritan agreeing on everything basically in that verse, but the Septuagint not, except for the death of Adam. Let's see what the Vulgate has to say here. This is the Vulgate. You got the Latin and the English translation underneath it. So it says here, Adam lived 130 years. He begot a son to his own image and likeness, and called his name Seth. And the days of Adam after he begot Seth were 800 years. He begot sons and daughters. And all the time that Adam lived came to 930 years. So we got 130, 800, and 930. So the Vulgate agrees with the Masoretic and the Samaritan there. Now let's take a peek as well at the Syriac, or the Peshitta. The Peshitta, I have it here on the right-hand side of the screen. The Peshitta, this is Genesis chapter 5, verse 3. So, by the way, this is an English translation from the Aramaic Bible. And this was, the Aramaic Bible would have been, it's dated about the 2nd century. So it's pretty early. And here it says 130, Adam was 130 years when he had Seth, and lived 800 years, and all the days of Adam were 930 years. So in the first row here, we have the Masoretic, the Samaritan, the Vulgate, and the Syriac Peshitta all agreeing. The Septuagint is the odd one out. Now, does that mean that the Septuagint is the one that's wrong? It doesn't necessarily mean that the Septuagint is wrong. I mean, just because we have the majority of text says one thing and the minority says another thing, it doesn't necessarily mean it seems to suggest that probably the Septuagint is wrong here, but that does not necessarily mean that it is wrong, because it just could be that the Masoretic, Samaritan, Vulgate, and the Syriac all derived their text from another source that was not accurate, while the Septuagint derived its translation from a different source that was accurate. We know that the Septuagint was translated from Hebrew into Greek. So if this was accurately translated, and I can't see why it wouldn't, how would there be so many, 100 years off in almost everything here in the first several entries? How could they get that wrong, all that wrong at the same time? So it seems like I would suspect that the original Hebrew that was used to translate it into Greek, the Septuagint, probably did have these numbers in there. Okay, so the first row, Aaron says everything here is corrupted, all of it. Yeah, I can't say everything is corrupted, because I don't think we have evidence that everything is corrupted, but we do certainly have evidence that a good part of it is. Let's try the second line here, Seth. Now Seth is got Genesis chapter 4 verse 25, 26. So let's do this. Well, let's first have a look here. Masoretic and Samaritan agree. Seth was born when Adam was 130. Seth had a son when he was 105. He remained another 807 years, and he lived to be 912. So that agrees with the Samaritan. The Septuagint, of course, is off by 100 years, as we see, adds 100 years to everything except for the 912. So instead of 130, it's 230. Instead of 105, it's 205. Instead of 807, it's 707, and the death is still at 912. So let's see what the let's start with the Syriac. Seeing that the Syriac is a little bit closer, a little bit older, more ancient, so we have to go back to Genesis chapter 4, verse 25. Okay, so whoever put this in here, it's the actual scripture reference here is just talking about Seth being born, but it doesn't really say the actual year. So this will be in chapter 5. So Adam was 130 years. He begot Seth. So Seth lived. So this is Genesis chapter 5, verse 6. Shaith, if you will, in the Peshitta here, the Syriac, lived 105 years, and he begot Enos. So Masoretic says 105. I'm going to just move this over. Samaritan also says 105. Septuagint is 205. Okay, so once again, the Syriac agrees with the Samaritan and Masoretic, 105, and it says Shaith lived after he begot Enos 807 years and begat sons and daughters. All the days of Shaith or Seth were 912 years. So again, the Syriac agrees with the Masoretic / Samaritan against the Septuagint. So let's see what we have in the Latin Vulgate. Vulgate says 105, 807, and 912. So once again, we have all four manuscripts agreeing, Masoretic, Samaritan, Syriac, and Vulgate agreeing against the Septuagint here. Now again, I want to say this again. Does that mean the Septuagint is wrong? No, it doesn't prove the Septuagint is wrong. It does lend some credence to the idea that the Septuagint is the one that's off here. Okay, I got to say that. But it doesn't prove it to be wrong. Because again, it could just be that the other four texts, Masoretic, Samaritan, Syriac, and Vulgate, all have their roots go back to another text that may be corrupted, whereas the Septuagint may have used a text that was not so corrupted in that way. But it is what it is, right? We got 4 against 1 right across the board here so far, except for the year of the death of Adam and Seth. Max says logic is what differentiates us with the beasts. I agree, yes. This is true, says, so with all of these ages being off a little, make every calendar wrong? Well, if you mean like the date of from creation per se to this, to where we are today, I would say yes, they're all wrong in that way, or at least. Well, I mean, if we have 5 texts, like we're comparing 5 texts tonight, so with 5 texts, I would say that it's either they're all wrong or one is wrong, especially when you have like all this red like this here, because they all disagree. So it's either they're all wrong here or one of them is right and the other ones are wrong. This is true, says, yes, that's right. We have to keep in mind that people were doing their best to keep the record straight. That's true, yeah. I can't help but think again about my own genealogies that, several years ago, looking up my own genealogies. And it wasn't that long ago, going back to my great-great-grandfather or great-great-great-grandfather. It wasn't that long ago. And even then, it's like the numbers are all over the place. And it's like, what in the world? How old was he when he got married? How old was he when he died? How old was, these numbers are all over the place. There's even one of my great-grandfathers, I guess you could say, not even sure where he's buried, because it's like, well, he lived here. And it wasn't like, was in the late 1800s, just before it turned, wasn't that long ago, say 150 years ago or something like that. Wasn't that long ago. So he lived in this community and he died in this community. So he must be buried somewhere in this community in some cemetery. I called up cemeteries and everything. And, I spoke to people that were, in charge of different cemeteries around, and you'd be surprised how many people have been lost. And that's just within 150 years. You'd be surprised how many people have been lost, the names, the ages, the day or the year that they were buried, the year that they died. So much has been lost. And that's just almost like yesterday compared to 5,000 years ago, this kind of stuff. So it's no wonder that we have numbers all over the place like we do here. That's amazing. Okay, now the third entry here. We have Enosh. So this particular gentleman put Genesis 4:26. So I think that he's kind of, again, just kind of looking at what he did before. I think what we should just do here is go with the Genesis chapter 5. So Vulgate, it says Enosh lived 90 years, begot Kenan, lived an extra 850 years, and then he died 905 years. So this is 90, 815, and 905. This is 90, 815, 905. 90, 815, 905. Again, the Vulgate agrees with the Masoretic and the Samaritan. And, of course, the Septuagint's got the extra 100. Well, look at this. 100 extra here. Well, that's what they did before anyway. They added extra 100 here, but then take it off on the next one, so that in the end you still get the same number. So you see, this is what the Septuagint did all along, from Adam, Seth, Enos. So the Septuagint added an extra 100 for the age of when these sons were begotten, but took it off of the remaining years of the life, so that way the end number still agrees. Isn't that interesting? And so let's see the Syriac. The Syriac says, I would expect it to be the same. Enosh 90, 815, and 905. Yeah, Syriac agrees with the Masoretic and Samaritan and the Vulgate, again against the Septuagint. But nevertheless, all the numbers are in agreement at the end, the age of the death of these patriarchs. So we got the first three. So far, the Septuagint is the odd one out, especially with these years of birth and the years when they had the son. But the time remaining is adjusted to agree with the year of the death. Fourth one, Kenan. So the Masoretic and Samaritan say 70, 840, and 910. Of course, the Septuagint adds 100 years. Instead of 70, it's 170, and then takes the 100 years off to balance it out after the remaining years. Instead of 840, it's 740, and the end is the same, 910. So again, 70, 840, 910. Let's have a peek again at the Peshitta. Kenan says 70 and lived 840 and 910. Yeah, so Peshitta consistently is in agreement with the Masoretic and Samaritan. Vulgate, Kenan 70, 840. Now this is different. So Kenan lived 70 years and he begot Mahalalel. He lived 840 years more, and then he died at 910. So wait a minute. Oh, okay. Hold on a sec. No, it is the same. 70, 849. Oh yeah, it is the same. Here, I'm getting confused myself here. Yeah, so that is the same as the Peshitta and the Masoretic Samaritan. And again, the Septuagint is the one it's out here. Now we have Jared. This is number 6 in the list. I know, guys, I'm sorry, this is probably very difficult to read, especially if you have a cell phone or mobile device. Jared's number 6. So we have the Masoretic, and the Masoretic agrees with the Septuagint here for a change, and the Samaritan is the one that's different. So the Masoretic says 162. So Jared was 162 when he had his son. He lived another 800 years, which brought him to 962. Okay, so the Samaritan's the one who took 100 years off here. So instead of 162, Jared had a son at 62. Instead of 800 years remaining, it's this odd number, 785. And then Jared dies at 847. So, what do you guys think? Is the Vulgate going to agree with the Masoretic or the Samaritan? I should say Masoretic / Septuagint. or the Samaritan? Is the Syriac going to agree? I feel like I'm on some kind of game show now, right? How many of you say this Syriac is going to agree with the Septuagint as opposed to, is the Syriac going to agree with the Samaritan? Is the Vulgate going to agree with the Masoretic Septuagint? Or is the Vulgate going to agree with the Samaritan here? Because so far, the Vulgate and the Syriac agreed everywhere on all points with the Masoretic, which also agrees with the Samaritan. So Masoretic, Samaritan, Vulgate, and Syriac all agree up to this point. But now we have the Samaritan off. So what's going to be the case here? Let's have a look. The Peshitta. Mahalalel lived 65 years. So it agrees with, wait a second. We're doing Jared, right? Where's Jared? Mahalalel. Oh, sorry, we skipped over. No, I'm the one that's getting confused here now. So we got Jared. Yeah, we skipped over Mahalalel, right? Mahalalel? 65. Yeah, so Mahalalel lived 65, 830 years, died 895 years. So that, yeah, so the Syriac agrees with Mahalalel, agrees with Masoretic Samaritan as typical, and the Vulgate, 65, 830, 895. Okay, now let's go to Jared. Jared lived 162 years. So the Syriac says, the Syriac agrees with the Masoretic and the Septuagint here against the Samaritan. So it seems like the Samaritan is the one who's off now. So that one thing that Samaritan got off, again, it doesn't prove that Samaritan's off either, but this is where the Samaritan is different than the other texts. So instead of, the Samaritan says 62, Masoretic and Septuagint says 162, the Syriac says 62, 800 years, so Jared had his son when he was 62. He lived another 800 years, and he lived to be according to the Syriac, Jared had his son when he was 162. He lived another 800 years, and he died 962 years old. So that is in accordance with the Masoretic and Septuagint against the Samaritan. See what the Vulgate says. Vulgate says 62. Lived 800 years. Vulgate says 162. Lived another 800 years. And then he died 962. So here we have the Vulgate and the Syriac and the Masoretic and the Septuagint all agree, and the Samaritan is the odd one out. We'll do a few more here. This is true, says the Septuagint also matches the Dead Sea Scrolls. It does match the Dead Sea Scrolls on some things, but the Dead Sea Scrolls also matches these. The Masoretic matches the Dead Sea Scrolls on some other things as well. The Dead Sea Scrolls is it's in its own category, just like all these other ones are. Destiny says, "Hi, genealogies are of particular interest to me, and I am looking into my family ancestry." Well, hello, welcome, and shalom. Blessings to you and your family. Yeah, genealogies are very interesting, that's for sure. Hubert says, do you have a theory on why people lived to be so old back in those days? Well, assuming, I'm open to hear all kinds of different possibilities, but assuming this is literal and that they really did live to be several hundred years old, and I'm not saying they didn't, whatever happened in the days of Noah with the flood, that's when the life expectancy started to drop dramatically. Basically lost 90% of our life expectancy, right? From the days of Noah, from the flood. So what would normally be like 90 years old or 80 years old or 70 years old would back then would be like 900 and something, 800 and something, 700 and something. So it makes me wonder, if there was, the book of Jubilees talks about how the flood changed the entire nature of Earth. So again, assuming that it's literal, going on that interpretation, I think that it's likely that whatever happened in the climate of the Earth at the time of the flood is what really caused the life expectancy to drop dramatically. Enoch, we got, so Here again, the Masoretic and the Samaritan agree against the Septuagint, but all agree on the age of Enoch when he was taken, 365. Well, I would expect the Syriac to agree with the Masoretics and Samaritan. Let's see what we got here. Enoch lived 65 years. We got Methuselah, 65, so that agrees. Verse 22 here, and Enoch was pleasing to God after he begot Methuselah 300 years, and he begot sons and daughters, and all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Yeah, so there you go. As expected, the Syriac does agree with this Masoretic Samaritan against the Septuagint. Let's check out the Vulgate. Enoch lived 65, and then he lived another 300 years, which adds up to 365. Yep. So that agrees. They all agree there. Max says, but Job could have only have gotten wiser by age. Well, I appreciate your comment there, especially since you said you're young. So that's awesome. Thank you, Max. Aaron says, wisdom is knowing that we know nothing. Solomon concluded that it is all vanity. This is wisdom, actually. This is really good, Aaron. I like this. Reminds me of the ancient philosophers. And basically, my mother, I mentioned this several times. She used to always tell me, as I didn't really get the full of I didn't really understand what it really meant. Even now, I probably don't really know the full extent of it. But my mother used to always say, the more I know how much I don't know. The more I know nothing. And she was a type of lady that she would always be. She loved she loved education, further education, reading and getting educated and knowing more. She was one of those kind of ladies that really pursued all these, pursued knowledge, pursued education. And then, for her to say that, it's like, well, the more I know how much I don't know. It always stuck out to me. And I'm still learning what that means. Max says, famous Socrates quote too. Yes. Yeah, it's really good. What really gets me, is these, especially in the, in the religious realm, especially when it comes to certain Christians, it's like a lot of Christians are so I know this for sure. Dogmatic, very, very dogmatic. You get these people that are very dogmatic, this is the truth. This is what I know. This is for sure. 100%, 100,000%. This is, and I used to be like that too in many ways. I think probably am as well. I'm probably plagued with this a little bit even now, but it is true though. I think that the more you know, you don't know. The more that you know, the more that you know how much is out there that you don't know, and it humbles you. So you don't become so dogmatic and so confident, overly confident. Dunning-Kruger. There goes Christopher again with his Dunning-Kruger. Yep. All right. So Methuselah. This is the one that it's like they all disagree on this, except for the Masoretic and the Septuagint agree on the age of Methuselah when he died. But other than that, they all disagree. Now, here's the question. The Syriac, which one is the Syriac going to agree with? Since they all disagree, except for the age of death of Methuselah, where the Masoretic and the Septuagint agree. So I would expect the Syriac and the Vulgate to say that Methuselah died at 969. I may be wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. But the Samaritan says 720 according to this. So which one? Look at the differences. Okay, so we got 100 years. Well, let's start with how old Methuselah was when he had his first son. So that's 187 according to the Masoretic, 67, and then the Septuagint's 167. So so it's almost like the Septuagint took from the Samaritan and added the 100 like it typically does. So it seems like the Septuagint here is taking from a text that agrees with the Samaritan against the Masoretic. I'm just I'm just talking out loud here, thinking out loud. But look at the differences. So according to the Masoretic, after his son was born, Methuselah lived 782 years. The Samaritan says 653 years. The Septuagint says 802 years. Wow. This is true. Says it's going to agree with the Masoretic. Okay. Well, let's see. Okay, the Syriac. I'll pull this over so we can see the Masoretic. The Methuselah lived 187 years. That's right. It agrees with the Masoretic there. And after Methuselah lived, after he begot Lamech, 782 years. Exactly. And a total of 969 years. You got it. This is true. You got it. You nailed it. It does agree with the Masoretic. What about the Vulgate? So the Vulgate says, where is it now? Methuselah lived 87 years, 187 years, and then an additional 782 years, and died 969 years. So, yeah. The Vulgate and the Syriac agree with the Masoretic here, interestingly enough, against the Samaritan and against the Septuagint, except for the age of death. Couple more. Lamech. So with Lamech, all three of these Masoretic, Samaritans, and Septuagint, all three disagree on every number. Wow. In this chart, that's the only one that they all the numbers disagree right across the board. So again, what's the Syriac going to do? Agree with the Masoretic? What about the Vulgate? Okay, let's see what we got here. Syriac, Lamech lived 200 years and begot a son. So the Syriac also disagrees with all of them. So it makes it even more complicated, more confusing here, because according to the Masoretic, it's 182 years when Lamech had his first son. According to the Samaritan, 53 years. According to the Septuagint, 188 years. And now the Syriac says 200. What? Oh, you know what? Before we get let's see what the Vulgate says. 182 years. So that agrees with the Masoretic, right? Yeah. So the Vulgate agrees with the Masoretic. What about the rest? The remaining years, 595 years. Yep. And then Vulgate says that Lamech died when he was 777. So the Vulgate agrees with the Masoretic on all counts. Let's see what the Syriac says now. So the Syriac says that Lamech lived 200 years and then lived an additional 595 years. So even that number, oh, wait a second. So it agrees with the, oh, wait a second here. I see another mistake in the this number here, 595. Oh, no, it's not a mistake. Sorry, 595. So the Syriac agrees with this number here, the Masoretic, and also the age when Lamech died, 777. You see how these numbers are off so much. So we'll do two more, guys. This is true says, so does Lamech translate to disagreement? I understand that the word Lamech can signify captives or captivity. That's what I understand. This is true. It's a joke. Yeah, the amount of disagreements we see here. Yeah, definitely. Yep, it seems like Lamech should translate into disagreement for sure. All right. Well, so let's see what we got for Noah. Noah, we have all three of these Samaritan, Septuagint, Masoretic agreeing on the age he lived when he had Shem. Samaritan seems like it doesn't say when he died, but the Masoretic and the Septuagint agree it's 950. So again, let's see, this Noah was 500 years. So yeah, the Syriac agrees there. All right, it doesn't have the age of death. And again, Noah was 500 years old, so that agrees there as well. The Vulgate agrees with the Syriac, which also agrees with all the other manuscripts, Septuagint, Samaritan, and Masoretic. So they all agree on that number, 500. So that is the end, is it not, of, yeah. So that's the end of Genesis chapter 5. So once we get to Genesis chapter 10, the last part of it, and into Genesis chapter 11, we will continue with the comparison of these manuscripts like this. I would like to, Lord willing, God gives me the time and ability to do this, I'd like to actually reproduce the table like this, except for adding the other like the Vulgate and the Syriac as well onto that, so it's easier just to see all in one table. So yeah, that's amazing.